Thank you for joining the July 2021 VMware TAM customer webinar. This webinar is organized by the VMware TAM organization to provide our customers with the opportunity to hear great content and interact directly with great speakers that are delivering it. The goal is to make sure you're getting the full benefit from your software. Please make use of the Q&A feature to ask any questions. And if your question doesn't get addressed today, be sure and reach out to your TAM and ask them to follow up. Before we get into today's content, there are just a couple of basic announcemements. Our next TAM customer webinar will be on August 5th, and we'll have the privilege of being joined by Stephen Bidgley to help answer the question, why Tanzu? As I mentioned earlier, we want you to benefit from these sessions by interacting with the speaker. So if you have any questions during today's webinar, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom and we will address them during the webinar. At the end of today's session, you'll be prompted to fill out a simple 2-question survey related to the value you received from the session and any topic suggestions for future sessions. Your completion of the survey is a very valuable gift back to us, and we would greatly appreciate it. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and your TAM can make the recording link available to you. After a few months, the recording will be publicly available on the VMware TAM Services YouTube channel. That brings us to today's speaker and topic. Michael Patton is a senior success executive with the Success 360 team, and Brock Peterson is a senior cloud solutions architect. And together they will be talking to us about operations management. Michael, please go ahead.
Absolutely. Brock, let's go ahead and forward the slide. Again, my name is Michael Patton and my colleague Brock Peterson, and we're really excited to be here to talking to you today about Operationalize Your World and vRealize. So we'll go ahead and go through some agenda items. Let's go to the next slide. We'll just do some introductions. We'll talk about Operationalize Your World, how that relates to vRealize operations, and then the most important, going through the demonstrations. At the end of this demonstrations, you'll have references to be able to call upon for the content that we present in this webinar, as well as links to either blogs or references that we find helpful and that you'll find helpful as well. So again, thank you so much for joining today. As an introduction, again, my name is Michael Patton, been with VMware over 8 years, 5 of those years in professional services, and then the last 3.5 years within customer success. And as part of my introduction, I just wanted to talk briefly as part of this introduction with VMware Success 360 program. As part of this introduction, this is really a partnership that VMware has taken to really accelerate our adoption and consumption of VMware solutions by our customers. And we look to help you achieve your business outcomes faster, provide personalized and proactive guidance, measure and monitor your progress through success planning. And ultimately, we want you to get the most out of your VMware investments. The question is how do we do that? Go to the next slide. So the VMware Success 360 program that I'm a part of, I just recently changed that role. I was an architect, a customer success architect, and now I'm a customer success executive. And what that means is that VMware Success 360 is a program that simply complements the TAM program that you're having subscribed to with your TAM, with your account. And so in that partnership, the VMware Success 360 program essentially provides those TAMs with additional resources to help you adopt, consume VMware solutions that drive those business outcomes. And these are reflected with the workshops, adoption and guidance, digital learning, dedicated and proactive support, and success planning. And so I just wanted to share this, just an introduction to the context of my role. And my role as a success executive is to really just work within the Success 360 program. If you have any questions about the Success 360 program, just reach out to your TAM or your account manager. We'll go to the next slide. All right, so what we're here today to talk about is transforming your world through vRealize operations. And the beginning of this story begins with Iwan, and he is the author of the book, The VMware Operations Management. Now, if you see from this slide in the bottom left, you'll see that this is the actual 3rd edition. And this 3rd edition is publicly available at no cost, and it is self-published that we've made available. And these links are all available at the end of our slide presentation. And you'll be able to link, you can download this. Now you can see the update is July 2nd of this year. Now, as a what this means is that periodically you'll see updates to this document. And this document is all about the transformational components that vRealize provides for transforming your world through operations. And we're basically saying, how do you take vRealize and how does it change your organization? How do you begin to see differences in your organization when it comes to capacity management, costing, SLAs, troubleshooting, alerts, all of these things that revolve around operations management. And so that's what this book is about. And this is available for you to consume anytime, and you'll have that link. The other highlight I wanted to show here is that Iwan, as the author of the original book, has really opened it up to other authors, such as, Brock Peterson, my colleague, is an author as part of this book. Sajal Devanath, a great resource to be able to find. So all of these great resources have come together to contribute to this book. And through Iwan's links, either through LinkedIn or through different ways, anyone can actually contribute to this to make this a better resource for you to consume vRealize operations and how that can transform your world. All right, we'll go to the next slide. Go ahead,
Michael,
Brock.
before we,
go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Before we jump into the next slide, I think it's really important to share that there's quite a few different contributors in terms of what their roles are, right? So Iwan and Sunny started this movement, 10 or 12 years ago, and of course they're product managers, right? So they're interfacing with the development teams quite a bit. They're interfacing with TMMs and TMMs and the field like us. But there's also professional services engineers that contributed to this book, like Thomas Copton, Norman Go, TAMs like Andy and some others. Of course, PMs like Sunny and Iwan themselves, and then Brandon Gordon, who is one of the technical marketing managers for vRealize operations at VMware, who I like to say it knows more about vRops than anyone in the world, right? So he is the foremost expert. So lots of different personas contributing to this effort. And when you actually look at the download here, it's 400 or 500 pages long, right? So there's lots of different chapters around dashboarding, reports, architecture, what that cluster looks like, and how to present data back to the user. But the most important part is that we have different perspectives, right? It's not all development, it's not all product managers, it's not all TMMs. We're coming at this various different ways, and like you said, even have a chapter on vRealize True Visibility Suite at this point. So with that, I'll go to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about vRealize Cloud Management and kind of where vRops sits within the larger ecosystem of the CMBU. So hi, everybody. I'm Brock Peterson. I am a senior cloud solutions architect. So I came over to VMware as a part of the acquisition of Blue Medora, TVG. So I was with Blue Medora for about 4 or 5 years before that, and IBM for the first almost couple decades of my career. But what are we talking about, and where do we sit within the cloud management suite? So I like to show this slide because it shows everything kind of top to bottom, starting with TAM's observability, wavefront, application operations up top. So, think of app services, build services, and monitoring those down through the vRealize suite. So vRops, vRealize, Verni, vRTVS. You can even kind of put Cloud Health off to the right here a little bit, which is another acquisition that VMware made. But what we're going to be focusing on mainly is, of course, vRealize operations. So, the broader functionality that we have within this suite. Log Insight, of course, looks at logs. Verni looks at network, but operations is just that, right? And some of the boxes underneath, things like infrastructure monitoring, cost and capacity management, log management, security, network visibility, compliance, and DR, all of those will be touched on a little bit within vRealize operations. And we're going to go into a demo later today, talk about everything that's new and great in 8.4 and how that fits into kind of the Ops Your World phenomena. But this is where we sit within the ecosystem. And of course, that's layered on top of VRA, VMware's automation platform. which also includes SaltStack at this point, SaltStack config, SaltStack SecOps, above all of your VMs, all of your containers, and it sits not only for a private data center, but things on the edge, managed data centers, public cloud, vSphere or VMware in the public cloud, right? So if we're talking about VMC on AWS, AVS, GCVE, et cetera, all of those are applicable here, right? So vRealize operations can be run on-prem, it can be run in the cloud. So we have the ability to see your environment wherever that exists, right? So I think it's important to just kind of know where we're sitting within the ecosystem, what we're talking about today, because it's a very small piece of the overall vRealize cloud management portfolio. So with that, I will go to the next slide, Michael. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So when we think about operationalizing the world, where do we start? And the way that we start this conversation is really looking at seeing where you as you provide services to your customers and the things that you as, those of you that are on the front line, working in the SDDC, supporting and managing your virtual machines in vCenter. A lot of these questions might resonate with you, such as, do your customers blame your infrastructure? Do you get in a finger pointing type of conversation at times between SQL DBAs and the infrastructure team, or networking and infrastructure, or the sysadmin? So, does your troubleshooting mean everyone's hair on fire? I think we can all relate to that at some point in our time working within an environment. And I think that begins to speak to the difficulties that we have in managing complexity. Other things that we think about, does your help desk provide a first level defense? Can you justify new infrastructure when utilization is not high? Do you struggle with many over provisioned VMs? These are just simply questions that we think that customers go through. And how do you begin to address these questions and identify what is the root of the problem? And what we're going to be talking about next is that idea of how do you compartmentalize and how do you address the operation aspect to get what you need out of vRops. Now, the key that we'll see in the next few slides is it's really an approach, it's a methodology of how you approach vRops to address these concerns. And so we'll go to the next slide.
Yeah, and quickly, Michael, before we do that, I think all of these questions are quite common, right? I get them from some of my customers. I'm sure folks on the call get them from theirs. And what we're trying to highlight is, 4 or 5 general use cases that the platform that vRealize operations and the Ops Your World phenomena can address, right? So the first one that came to me was, is your IaaS cheaper than public cloud or hybrid cloud? Right? How do we do that? How do we look at what my workloads are costing in the public cloud versus on-prem? vRealize operations and the costing engine allows you to do that, right? So we can do all of the costing down to, CPU and memory sort of granularity behind workloads to show exactly what a VM is costing on your private cloud versus what a, say, AWS or VMC in AWS or AVS workload might be costing you, right? So the granularity that vRops presents allows the admins, the BI folks to present those costs back to people. Another one that came to mind here is, do you struggle with many over-provisioned VMs? This is almost always the case with every customer that I talk to, or under provisioned VMs, right? But most often over provisioned VMs. And the vRops right sizing engine allows us to say, hey, we think these VMs are not being used to their fullest extent, right? And that may manifest a few different ways, be it CPU ready, CPU usage over the months, et cetera. But the right sizing engine allows the VI admin to buy back CPU, to buy back memory and allocate it to projects that actually need it. So I think, we could probably add 10 other questions here that Ops Your World and vRealize operations as a platform addresses, but that's kind of what we're talking about here. So with that, I'll go to the next slide.
Yeah, all good points. Thank you. And this slide here represents, I think, a summation of the methodology that we need to approach, because ultimately we're talking about being a service provider to our customers internally, however you define your customers. But what we see here with this restaurant analogy is a simplification of the complexity that we have within the SDDC. And we use this idea of the dining and kitchen area. So imagine you go to a restaurant, and as a customer, you go into that restaurant, you sit down, you have a menu. A couple of things come up with that. First, you want special attention when you go to a restaurant. You want to be able to be treated with that personal touch. You want to be able to know you're the most important person in that restaurant, because you want to have a good meal, you want to have a great conversation, and you're not necessarily worried about other people in the restaurant or anything like that. And so this dining area, whereas is contrasted with the kitchen layer. And imagine in the kitchen, that's where the secret sauce is made. That's where everything's being prepared, and everything is going to look presentable when it comes to the dining area. And so it's all about the kitchen area providing the best customer experience, in that restaurant. And so we use this analogy to simplify, two concepts. The concept of the consumer layer and the provider layer. And so, your customers, as they are consuming virtual machines, their experience, they're not worried about other virtual machines. They're not worried about, what is the infrastructure supporting? They're just worried about their VM and how things are working. And with that analogy, there's two components that we call out at the consumer layer. It's performance and capacity. And there's other ones as well, but these are just two that we just highlight. And so the question comes in, from a performance perspective, is the VM being served well by the platform? That is a key component in the methodology that you'll see in the book, in the ebook, relative to, Operationalize Your World. You are providing a service through your SDDC, through your infrastructure that's supporting that VM. And the next item there is capacity. We want to make sure, as Brock said just a few minutes ago, whether that machine, that virtual machine is right sized. Whether it's too small, we might want to increase its configuration, or if it's too big, we might want to right size for better performance. And so these are some of the questions that we see from a consumer layer as we provide that dining experience for our customers. And behind the scenes, here we have that provider layer. And here we have to make sure every customer in that restaurant, in that dining area, is being served well. We just don't want to focus on, so we want to make sure everyone is happy. We want everyone to have that positive experience. And so the key component that we start with, if you're wondering, from an Opsure World perspective, utilizing this restaurant methodology, where do you begin? And we recommend thinking about that there's no contention for resources among all the VMs. And you can take that analogy out to what that would look like. But essentially you're saying, is your infrastructure providing what it needs to run efficiently and effectively? And so we look at that from a performance perspective. From a capacity perspective, again, what is the overall cluster hardware that's supporting that VM? We focus on the cluster as a key component for measuring those service level agreements. If it's too low, we might have spent too much on hardware. If it's too high, we may need to buy more hardware. So it's that balancing effect. And so achieving that balance is sometimes an art more than a science, but we really believe that vRealize will be able to point you in that direction so that you have the confidence to be able to adjust where necessary. And then the last one we reference here is configuration. Looking for configuration or compliance and configuration drift, making sure that availability, whether that's an alert, whether that's insight, whether that's different components you see within vRealize, whether there's something going wrong or something needs to be reconfigured or some sort of service stops, all of these are indicators for you as the provider to provide that customer experience. And so we just start here because this sets the tone for the entire methodology around Opsure World. Brock, any thoughts or questions?
Michael,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I love this analogy. So I've been on many calls with Iwan where he's talking about this, right? And the clear demarcation here is the red line between the customer and the provider, or consumer and the provider. I often say customer because I think of it that way in terms of the restaurant. But the very first point is that whoever owns that VM, whatever application, whatever database they're running on, that's all they care about, right? All they want is a well-behaved application, database, and a VM supporting it. They don't care about the hundreds or thousands of other VMs running in the environment. They don't necessarily care about IaaS or PaaS or what overall utilization looks like, ESXi host density, et cetera, et cetera. They want a well-behaved application, and that's it, right? So we can give them a little bit of visibility into that with vRops, and I'll show that when I jump into the demo. But we can also give them a little bit of visibility into their capacity, right? So we can show them, hey, this is how things are behaving, this is how they're performing, and these are the recommendations that we're making, right? So just giving them a little bit of insight into the provider layer without giving them everything, I think goes a long way, right? Much like it would in the dining experience. Now, the provider layer, we care about everything, right? So be it performance, capacity, configuration, we have to know that IaaS is serving everybody. So not just a single table, not just a single person. We have to know that the overall environment, that there's no contention, we have no resource utilization issues, that VMs are properly sized, that we haven't run out of capacity, be it compute, storage, anything, and that we don't have any compliance and config drift, right? So all of those things, including availability, are presented within vRealize operations. In fact, in some of the latest releases, Iwan and the PMs have gone to an actual consumer and provider layer. So for those on the call that are familiar with vRops, you have it up and running, go to the Getting Started dashboard, and you'll see the various availability, performance, capacity, et cetera. When you click on those, and we'll do that here in a bit, you literally will see consumer and provider layers. So Iwan has kind of brought the restaurant analogy to the product just in the wording in and of itself. So I'll go to the next slide, Michael.
Yeah. Thank you. So this slide here represents our the transition point over to the demo. And so what this framework review is, what do you want to accomplish with your customers? What are your customers asking for? And as you tune into what your customers are asking for and defining your services that you're providing to them, these are just some categories we want you to keep in mind. There is a purpose in serving your VM and applications. Understanding your application environment is extremely important here. To build on that, we will leverage KPIs, different SLAs. It's just not about availability SLA. Availability SLA is just one of many. It's important to look at performance SLAs. Again, the whole point here in the methodology is, and looking at vRops is your VMs being served well? Is it serving your applications well? And if you can answer those questions, then you'll be getting to the heart of the operational components that vRops offers. Obviously management is going to come in and start asking about costing. And so, Rock will be able to show any type of dashboards associated with that. But asking that question as you compare different options to your customers, we know that our customers are looking at different options when it comes to on-prem versus public cloud. That's a very common conversation we'll have. vRops is going to be able to help you with that conversation. And then the pillars. When we think of the class of service, it's important to know that if you can define your class of service, you can offer more to your customers. If you are a customer, or if you are a company that provides chargeback, having that class of service can be directly related to the SLA and the criticality of the application that's being serviced by your infrastructure. And so looking at that class of service is critical to define. And then when you think about proof of success, really the key here is proactive operations, insight-based, not alert-based. And what we're saying here is with proactive, you have the tools within vRops to assess different areas of your infrastructure and to be alerted when necessary, but hopefully you've caught the issue prior to maybe being alerted. And that's important as well. And so this as a framework review, obviously we can't cover everything that's in the ebook, but this gives you the framework to begin of how you approach Operationalize Your World and what type of questions and what type of scenarios you'll be talking about and thinking about when you go through the ebook. And so with that, we'll transition now to the next slide, which will take us to the demo.
Yep, so let me bring up the demo at this point. And let me know, Michael, when you can see the VROPS UI.
We can. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Beautiful. Thank you. I love that. So, there's a lot in the deck, right? So the book is literally 500 pages long. So, there's all sorts of things that we can talk about, be it, cost, pillars, proofs of success, KPIs, purpose-driven dashboards, etc. We eventually need to dig in, right? And by dig in, I mean, get into vRealize operations, start playing around, look at the pillars, see how the pillars can, provide us visibility, be it provider or consumer. And I'll show some of that within the dashboards. But just so everybody's familiar, so everybody's on the same page, there's a landing page. It's called the Quick Start home page within vRealize operations. And it literally presents our 4 pillars, right? So performance, capacity, troubleshoot, and configuration. The first pillar allows us to look at things around performance, meaning, are all of our workloads optimized? Are they right sized? So are they too large? Are they too small? Do we need to right size them? The capacity pillar, looking at capacity around clusters, where we can reclaim capacity, meaning idle VMs, powered off VMs, orphan VMDKs, large snapshots, things like that. We also have the ability to plan certain scenarios, and this talks about public cloud. So if we want to work from private cloud on-prem into public cloud, we have the ability to say, hey, how much is that actually going to cost? And then the troubleshooting pillar is where I spend a lot of my time because I use vRealize operations as a troubleshooting platform frequently. The Workbench presented in VROPS 8.0 gives us guided remediation when you're troubleshooting a VM or an app or a host or a data source, something like that. And then of course, configuration, things around compliance, HIPAA, FIPS, DIS, things like that. So with that, I'm going to move over into kind of the consumer provider methodology via dashboards. So when I jump into dashboards,
Brock,
it'll take, go ahead.
Before you jump into that, we've got one question in the Q&A. Actually, yeah. I guess it's kind of 2 parts about the right sizing you just spoke of. And like, does VROPS, is it aware of, for example, with RAM use, does it know what the application is using RAM for, like, Citrix sessions or some sort of SQL database or something that's being used for cache? Like, does it take that into consideration for right sizing recommendations?
Yeah, I'm looking it up here. Is that the question from Jay?
Correct.
Okay, so yeah, so I mean, generally we're going to not necessarily know what the RAM is being used for. So be it SQL, DB reserves, et cetera. We'll just know, hey, is it being used? Is it not being used? Similarly for CPU right sizing, right? So is the CPU being used? Is it being used continuously? Is it being used just for monthly patching, et cetera? So, Jay, you're right. I have seen use cases or examples where, certain recommendations may not work during, say, a monthly patching window. But generally, the right sizing recommendations that we make are conservative. So, we'll never recommend a decrease, for example, by more than 50%, and we'll never recommend an increase by more than 100%, right? So if you're running say a 4x8 VM, we're not going to go above 8x16. We're not going to go below a 2x4. And I'll show you a little bit here within Automation Central how you can turn that dial even more. So when you're doing, say, automated remediation or automated right sizing of workloads, you can turn that down such that it would be only 25%. But Jay, your point is well taken. I have seen examples where the right sizing was a little aggressive, and we can turn the dial on that a little bit so we don't run into problems. I think Mukesh had asked another question as well. So Jay,
hang on one
happy
second.
to answer.
There's a follow-up question that Jay asked, and it basically talks about not seeing maybe VRAPs giving proper advice for VMware's own products and sizing suggestions. And my opinion on that would be not to mess with any predefined, just stick with the VMware product sizings as recommended in the docs online. I wouldn't deviate from that. I think the essence of right sizing is for VMs probably outside of the VMware products. Brock, do you see that different?
No, I don't. I mean, I'm interested in the question, though. I think the second sentence here, right? I've also not seen the tool give proper advice for VMware own products. Are you talking about other things like, say, vRealize, Verni, VRA, things like that? And are we talking about, how they're being used in terms of, say, for VROPs, objects and metrics, and the corresponding sizing? Or are we just talking about how they're being used? I'm not totally sure what that second sentence means.
I'm interpreting Jay's question is that it's specific to our own products and sizing. So let's say we had VRA, and that VRA then was being flagged and showing, hey, you could downsize that virtual machine to lower CPU and memory. And the question is, should you? And I would probably say, no, I would not take that as an opportunity to downsize any other VMware products that would be outside of the sizing suggestions in the docs.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there's another comment there that says, NSX manager is being referenced there, whether or not, yeah, I would definitely not be resizing any NSX manager in that situation. Okay, well, other questions? We got Mukesh. In our setup, mostly if VMware manage VMware tools, how to avoid this and update VM if the reboot is required. Let's hold on Mukesh's question. Let's go to Brian's. Does the right sizing take into account for NUMA for CPU sizing?
I don't believe it does at this point, Brian. I'm going to jot that one down and follow up with you on it. Michael, can you take that one down, or Brian, whoever?
Nope, I'll take it. Great. Yep, no problem.
Naresh has one around the difference between pre-capacity data shown in VROPS and vCenter as well. So I've seen some minor discrepancies on, free capacity between the two major. So I would be interested in, knowing what those differences are, how large of, a gap we're talking about, and kind of go from there. So let's take that one down as well to follow up with Naresh. So Tony, this one we were talking about a little bit earlier, right? So in your environment, VROPS is reporting right sizing its own nodes, right? So 16 down to 8. So a couple questions I have around that is potentially it's recommending those right sizing based on consumption, but are you over the object and metric thresholds, right? So if you're beyond the recommended thresholds, be it 8.1 or 8.4, there are KBs out there that tell you exactly how many vCPU and how much memory you're going to need based on those objects or metrics. So if you're using what's ever in that sizing guide, I would likely not resize the VROPS nodes. But Tony, good question. I'll follow up with you. Brian, do we get the ability to follow up with everybody on these?
So I don't think there's a direct way to reach out to folks who ask questions.
Okay.
Because I think
no problem. I'm writing down the name, so we should be good.
Okay.
If they would work with their TAM, that would help as well, right? If they could, if they didn't get their question answered, if they have a follow-up, if they reach out to their TAM to get back to you, like Brock and Michael, that could be helpful too.
Yeah, for sure. Great idea. So Mukesh asks why VROPS 8.4 integration with VRA 7.6 is dropped. Likely, we're trying to get to VRA 8. Mukesh, are you planning on staying at VRA 7.6 or upgrading to, the new containerized VRA 8? This is likely, a product support matrix sort of question answer, right? At some point, integrations to the older VRA 7 will be dropped.
Good questions from everyone.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's all of them for now, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So back to exploring the dashboards. So this is where Iwan and the PM team have, provided the consumer provider visibility via management flows, collections, things like that. And these are always changing, right? So if you remember back to the 6.x days, the UI looked totally different. You basically just had a kind of a grouping of dashboards that got a little bit nicer, 6.7 timeframe with the HTML5 clarity-based UI, and I expected, to be a little bit more streamlined, minimized as we move forward, and 8.6 comes out this fall. So, what are we looking at and why? So if you jump into each of these, you literally see a consumer layer and a provider layer, right? And generally, the consumer is the workload, the VMs. They're the person eating the meal. The provider, of course, is us, vSphere, as the people kind of providing the capacity for the VM. And it's available for each different metric or metric group, right? So availability, performance, capacity, et cetera. This is where I spend a decent amount of my time within the performance management dashboard grouping, because it allows me to see, which VMs are contentious, which are being used most, which are the actual heavy hitters. And then from a provider layer, we're looking at what you would expect to look at: ESXi host, contention, utilization, cluster, contention, utilization. So, let's just jump into one of these. I'm going to select VM performance, look at contention, and then just kind of work my way through what Iwan and the group have provided to us. So it allows us to basically select data center, and it shows you how many of my workloads. I only have 205. I have a single cluster with only 9 hosts. So almost every customer's environment is going to be more interesting than mine. But what this allows you to do is select a VM within that data center. Any of these, of course, are sortable, right? So if you just click on the title bar, you can sort and grab a VM, and the VM that you select will show things like CPU ready, disk latency. Do I have anything that is experiencing contention? Of course I don't in my environment. This is going to be far more interesting in yours. But when you have things like RAM contention, when you have things like CPU ready, it's not always intuitive just to throw more hardware at it, right? As we know, CPU ready can be brought down in terms of percentage or milliseconds weighted by decreasing the number of vCPU, right? So we can create symptoms around that. We can create alerts around that and provide those back to the provider, right, or the VI admins. But what this gives is a little bit of visibility actually into the VM itself, point in time, as well as you can see spark lines over on the right-hand side showing, hey, this is what CPU ready has looked like over time. This is what disk latency has looked like over time. So a lot of these dashboards are, riffs on previous ones where we were talking about maybe troubleshooting VMs or troubleshooting, ESXi hosts or data stores related to them. But be it a VM based on contention, utilization, et cetera, go back to my getting started page, we can show all of the provider, all of the consumer type stuff, as well as information at the ESXi host and cluster type level, right? So, if we're looking at just consumer layer, contention, utilization, right sizing, I think right sizing is very important. I'll get into a dashboard around that here in a little bit. But, we can look at from the provider layer. So now we're jumping over to the VI admin team saying, hey, I have a certain number of clusters, only a single in my environment, but what does my CPU memory, balloon, IOPS, what do those look like from a provider perspective, right? Because I need to be providing my IaaS to my consumer such that everyone is happy, right? Not just the apps running on a certain VM. I need everybody to be happy. So this is where I can look at utilization for my, big four CPU memory disk and network on a particular cluster, right? So do I have any peak CPU utilization? Nothing crazy, right? 0 to 60%. Peak memory utilization? No, nothing crazy. I have 0 to 75%. And then I can show what these look like over time, not only by average, but say highest, for example, or lowest, for example. I think, there's lots of different ways to present some of this data. And, the dashboard that I'm showing here is one out of the box, really easy. We can do a lot of it. Now, this dashboard that I'm showing is one around right sizing that one of our other customers who presented on a Power Block a few weeks ago did. He contributed to the VMware code, so it's up on the VMware sample exchange, which I can show here in a little bit. But what this dashboard is allowing for is users to actually see what's going on their VM, right? So it's kind of a provider and consumer type dashboard. So again, single cluster up top, and I can show things like CPU ready storage latency, IOPS, et cetera. But now the user has the ability to go down below. Let's just look for, one of my VMs. The user has the ability to go down below and see how that VM, how that workload is behaving. So for example, okay, this is interesting. So this is my cloud proxy for my vRealize operations environment. It shows, of course, the host it's on, the OS, et cetera, but it will show the max CPU usage over the last 30 days. So this dashboard has an underlying view, right? So views used to build reports, and they can be used to feed widgets and dashboards. But it also shows CPU usage currently, right? So while the max usage over time, and I know this was yesterday because I was pounding that cloud proxy, was 95%, it's only being used at 2% at this point, right? And it also shows, and this goes to, I think Mikesh's and some of the other comments earlier, hey, is vRealize Operations recommending any right sizing? Meaning, how many vCPU do I have currently? And how many vCPU is VRops recommending that I add or potentially remove, right? So here's an example of one. So, I have 12 CPUs at this point, and this box is totally unused, my VRA lab at this point. So it's recommending that I decrease by 60 CPUs. So, is it something that I want to take action on right away? Maybe, maybe not. Is it something that I can alert on? Yes, for sure. Is it something that I may want to keep an eye on, share out to either the VMs, the application developers, the database folks? Yes, absolutely. And we can do that, as you guys know, with that sharing button in the top right-hand corner, right? So if you want to share this out with whoever, simply copy that link, go ahead and share it out. You can email it if you have an SMTP instance up and running, et cetera. But this goes back to the point where VRops and all of the getting started dashboards can be used for both consumers and providers. We can use all of the metrics that we consume to define SLAs, to create custom groups around, say, gold platforms, silver platforms, and the like. So a lot of what we go through up top here from management, we can jump into capacity, we can jump into cost, configuration, and each will have a consumer layer and a provider layer.
Hey, Brock.
Michael mentioned.
Yeah, there's a question that's come up. If we want to deploy some more VMs in the cluster, will VRops help me calculate it? And if yes, can you show us an example?
Okay, so Gokul asks, would it put more VMs in the cluster in any cluster or in the actual vRops cluster itself?
No, let's take this question from the perspective of if you want to deploy some VMs in a workload cluster, you just want to add more VMs. How will vRealize help me calculate that? So from a sizing perspective, let's take a look at the what if.
Yep, yeah, exactly. So there's lots of different examples that we have within what if analyses, right? So the what if analysis is designed to do things like workload planning, be it traditional or migration to public cloud and kind of everything in between, right? So traditional is up top, and I'll show you that here in a second, whereas migration to public cloud is down below. So say we want to add some VMs. We want to add VMs. We will just give it, I don't know, I'll call it test. We'll go ahead and select a location. So I'm going to grab my data center. I'm going to grab my cluster. You will definitely have more. And if you want to add, I don't know, I'm just going to say 4x8s with 100 gig of disk space. They're going to be 90% used. We're going to grow at 10% a year. And we want to add 10 of them, right? So the ability to select whatever cluster you want is in the location. You can configure the VMs that you want to add, and if you have different configurations, we can stack these what if analyses on top of each other. Or you can import them from an existing VM. So say, for example, you have a VM in that cluster, and you're just going to add 10 more clones of that VM, we would use the import. And then you're off and running. Basically, you do a run of the scenario, and it's going to show you kind of post-deployment configuration. It'll do the same thing for the cloud. So, if we have 100 VMs on-prem, what's that going to look like after migration? So here, excuse me, here's our test scenario, right? So we're going to add 10 VMs to this cluster. And this is basically what it looks like. So the recommended cluster is this. This is going to be the peak CPU. This is going to be the peak memory, the peak disk space used. We can view some details on that as well. So if you click the details, we can get some scenario results as quickly as this loads. That was the question being asked, right? Yep, there we go. So our workload will fit. It's going to cost roughly $331 per month, and we're going to have roughly 307 days before we run out of the most constrained resource, be that CPU, memory, or disk. I think that was the question, right, Michael?
Correct.
Okay.
I'd also just like to add to this that what we've done right here, what Brock's demonstrated is the what if analysis. There's other components within vRealize with forecasting. We don't necessarily need to go there, but the idea of forecasting will actually give you a visual representation. I mean, you can go through the what if analysis, and that's all well and good, and that's definitely recommended for planning, as Brock suggested. But you can also navigate to the forecasting tool to show, how much capacity, both CPU and storage, you have left, and that's a visual that you can pick up really quick too. Just wanted to add that in. Looks like you're going there right now.
Yeah. So what I did was I just, each object within vRealize operations, be it a VM, a host, a cluster, or any, say, VRTBS discovered object like, a UCS blade or a SQL database or what have you, will have a capacity tab within the summary view, right? And it will show you how much time you have remaining and how much capacity you have remaining on the most constrained resource, right? So in this case, I'm looking at my cluster that has roughly 307 days left. This is what that projection looks like over time. And then, of course, you can project out to up to 12 months. All right, we're indicating, the capacity engine within vRealize is indicating we have roughly 307 days until we run out of disk space. This is how much capacity we have remaining in terms of percentage. And we get a little bit more granularity around, CPU, how much total we have, how much is usable, what our recommended sizes, et cetera. So capacity engine and the capacity tab will be available for each object that we actually capture. So over on the left-hand side here, you can see all of the related objects to the one that I have. But I encourage you as VROPS users to explore each of these, jump through, if you want to just go ahead and select one. So I know that I actually have a couple of database instances running here. I can select that actual database instance and run through the tabs, or TDS discovered instance. So, not everything is available like compliance capacity, but you can explore all of the metrics available from it, whether those, for example, this is a SQL instance I'm just looking at, and then you can see all of, kind of the parent-child objects as well, and where they sit within the vSphere infrastructure, right? So this VM is hosting this database instance. This database instance has these database queries, jobs, wait types, all of the other SQL type objects. But we're kind of getting off track there a little bit. Were there other questions, Michael?
Yeah, there's a few here. I'm going to go through the question here. Let's deal with, can external data be imported to use to forecast cluster capacity? We maintain a 6-month pipeline of pending VM builds and want to use this information to assess future capacity, such as, is there an adapter available list, such as pulling from SharePoint or Excel? So again, the core question is, can external data be imported to use to forecast cluster capacity? This is a very interesting question because you can import data, but the key there is being able to forecast cluster capacity.
Yeah, and this is the question from Roy, right? So
yes, it is.
I have yet to import any external data, Roy, into VROPS. Of course, we can export, and you can import, say for example, constructs, meaning dashboards, reports, views, supermetrics, things like that. But I have not imported any external data, and I don't think it's possible at this point. But again, I will jot this one down and follow up on it. Have you been able to do that, Michael?
So there's definitely being able to import data is definitely there. Now, whether or not how that data is used in the forecast cluster capacity, I'm unsure of. It was really just bringing in that data just to be consumed. And I think we have to ask, it's a follow-up question. That's probably the best to not get us off track. But great question, Roy. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think Henry has a good one too. So he was talking about the core to socket settings reversed on that previous dashboard, and yeah, I think you're right. I think the core and socket settings were reversed. Okay, Gianni is asking about workload planning the other way. So resources available divided by average VM size. How many more VMs would I be able to deploy if I added X hosts? Yeah, so there's other. I'll jump back to the what if analyses. So there's other. What if scenarios that are available to us. Let me just jump back. All right, so what are we going to do if we actually add a host? So up top is where we're actually adding VMs, right? And then we also have the ability to add hyperconverge. What the question was around is adding hosts, right? So do we want to add any hosts? I will call this test 2. Where do we want to add those hosts? And what type of hosts are there, right? So I have an R640 in my environment. You have the ability to add any server type if you want, custom. Otherwise, we have 3,000 different configs available. And if the server that you purchase is not here, of course, you can add them kind of ad hoc. I'm just going to go ahead and add another R640 in my environment, say, when am I going to deploy it, number of servers to add, and I'll have to run that scenario. So this should tell us how many more VMs we have the ability to add when that host is deployed. So Gianni, good question. It sounds like you're using the what if analyses already. So, okay, there we go. So scenario results, adding our deployments. This is how much CPU and memory we will have available. And, basically when we're going to run out, which is of course, quite some time off in the future.
One more question. Actually, we got a couple more questions, but let's go to the next one.
Yeah.
Sorothi asks, is there any automation in place to create similar custom dashboards for different application teams, about 300 custom application groups besides cloning?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm with you. I've cloned a lot of dashboards in my time. So the only other option would be the API, right? So vRealize Operations does have an API. I have not used it to do any dashboard creation, but I would encourage you to explore that.
Yeah, the next question from David is, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, and you would do that for, be it dashboards, reports, views, any other construct that you might be looking at, including custom groups. There's a lot that we can do, and a lot that I've done with automated, say, adapter instance creation or alert adjustment. So there's a tool out on GitHub called the vRops Power CLI toolkit. So it's a tool that the DevOps team back in Medora built 4 or 5 years ago that allows for users to, say, deploy 100, 200, 1,000 adapter instances if they need to without cloning. So I know we leverage the vRealize Suite API for that, and have a look at it. So go out to GitHub, vRops CLI toolkit. Next question David has. So what analysis functionality available through the vRealize API currently? I believe so, David, and if not, it's being worked on. So I'm jotting that one down as well.
I'd like to camp on that question. What about the Workbench? I've not found to be able to consume the Workbench via the API.
Yeah.
I don't think that's applicable here, but I just wanted to add that in because other people have asked about that.
Yeah, I don't think the Workbench is consumable via API. So for me, the Workbench is just that, right? It's a framework around which you troubleshoot a problem. So the objects, the metrics, of course, those are all available via API. But the Workbench itself is really a canvas, right? So this was presented in vRealize 8.0. And those of us that have developed dashboards have done this for many, many years, trying to do something like this. And 8.0, they presented it to us. But it's really a canvas. Of course, we can capture all these objects like campaign. We can capture all of these metrics, right, campaign. But the Workbench itself is really sort of a UI construct. I don't know that it's available via API.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I just wanted to just throw that in there. Thank you. There's a next question. Mukesh is asking how to optimize VM provisioning time in VRA through vRops. A current setup VRA takes 30 minutes. So again, how to optimize VM provisioning time in VRA through vRops. That's an interesting question. The first thing I think of there is, what prevents, what takes up time when we're provisioning in VRA? So obviously the point there is, if a VM is deploying to a slower storage, that could impact that as well. One of the things I think about that is just a quick response would be maybe the decision-making process that vRops might be able to leverage there with workload placement. That could be something I would think about when thinking about optimizing VRA provisioning time. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm sort of interested in what's taking so long there, right? So the VRA takes 30 minutes to provision the VM. That sounds to me like something on kind of the VRA appliance itself. Right? So we should be able to deploy a VM in seconds, not minutes. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Next question. You can always add another widget. There was just more of a suggestion that was being called out here. You can always add another widget with a list of all the groups feeding into the REST dashboard. Next question. Thinking or something. Okay. Go ahead, Brock.
No, I think what Daljinder was getting at is, we can add a widget to the dashboard that just shows custom groups, right? So rather than showing just an object, you can just have a custom group, and then you can select that custom group and feed another widget from another dashboard.
And there's another question here. Thank you so much for answering my previous question. If vRops shows if, for example, 30% capacity remaining in the cluster doesn't mean that all the 100% usage of the cluster or it's leaving a host capacity for high availability of the cluster. Interesting question.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, it depends. So it depends on how you've configured capacity, right? So when you're assessing capacity, you have the ability to either go based on demand or allocation, and there's always the ability to configure headroom, right? So in a cluster, if you have, say, 10 or 15, 20% headroom configured, it's going to say, hey, I have 30% remaining, and then of course you would have that headroom kind of above and beyond that. So you have the ability to run sort of quote thin or, kind of quote thick. So I think you have the ability, Gokul, to turn the dial on that a little bit. And I would encourage you to look at the assessment of capacity within the capacity pillar. Okay,
Gianni asks, any future plans on further integrating VROPS with VRA, like giving customers automatically access to VROPS to show information about resources within their projects? I'm wondering if this question is actually going to VROPS or just showing the data within VRA.
Yeah, I think it's maybe a little bit of both, right? So the integrations between all of the products in the vRealize suite, be they LI or Verni or VRA, are always progressing, right? They're always moving forward. So, I think the integration with vRealize came around in, 7.5-ish, that's 6 timeframe. Verni just came out in 8.2. VRA is relatively new. So, some of the integrations, whether we're pulling, pushing, Gianni, I would encourage you, if the feature is not there currently, to work through your TAM and or your CMBU rep to get a feature request open for it, because the product team is always working on these integrations, right? We're always trying to make them more robust, richer, do what the client wants via the integration. So I don't think it's there currently, but let's go ahead and open a feature request for it. I think that's it at this point, isn't it, Michael?
I think so. Let's continue on.
Okay. All right, good. So where were we? I think we were in the dashboard. We jumped on a kind of consumer provider layer. Quite detailed, right?
Hey, Brock.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're struggling with your audio here. I don't know if there's anything you can change. It's been quite often during the session so far, but it's just especially bad right now.
Okay.
No, it's good now. It's good now. So I don't know if there's anything that you had moved or changed or something, but just wanted to give you a heads up.
Okay, thank you. If it happens again, let me know.
Yeah.
Let's jump to cost. I can always jump over to computer audio as well. So if it gets really bad, Andy, just let me know and I'll jump over to computer audio.
Yeah, perfect. So we didn't catch your intro there. When you just transitioned, we did not catch that.
Okay. All right. So we're going to jump into cost a little bit, right? So we're going to talk about the costing details, what the cost mechanism looks like, and how we can kind of present all of that back to the user. So cost, what's it look like? Consumer layer, provider layer. So we want to show back data. We want to charge back data. We have the ability to show people what VMs are costing. And of course, if you're a provider, we have the ability to show people pricing, right? So if you're looking for revenue, if you're upcharging, adding some services, adding support, we have the ability to show VM costs as well as VM pricing. Now that said, we have the provider layer as well, right? So we have the ability to assess what things are costing in your environment, to show which are the most expensive clusters, which are the most expensive VMs, which data centers, and what the cost drivers are. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a little bit. But a lot of these dashboards will show on-prem, and then we can jump into some of the public cloud stuff as well. But costing, much like performance capacity type metrics, you can use to publish custom dashboards and or content reports. So this is one that I did that shows basically all the vCenters, data centers, clusters, hosts, VMs in your environment, and what that total data center cost is, right? So again, it's my lab, it's not terribly robust, but 90 SXI hosts, 210 VMs, and $22,000 per month is what it's costing me. So most often folks are going to want to, okay, what are my most expensive hosts? What are my most expensive VMs? And what are my most expensive clusters, right? Let's grab the low-hanging fruit and see what we can do. So what I've done is created a dashboard allowing me to select data centers and clusters, and then showing me the most expensive hosts by total cost, how much they're costing month to date. For example, this guy is costing me just over $1,000 per month. I know it's ESXi 17, it's got 26 VMs on it, here are the data stores, et cetera. But as I select it, over on the right-hand side, I'm also shown VM cost details, right? So now this allows me to say, all right, which of my VMs are costing me the most, and what on those VMs? Is it CPU, is it memory, is it disk? So for example, I'm just gonna go ahead and minimize this left-hand pane. So this is showing me, so BR83, okay, Klinefelter, is actually costing me $261 a month. Total daily cost is just over $8. This is how much memory is costing, CPU is costing, et cetera. So what we do to determine those costs is basically, put in what our ESXi host costs, and then how many VMs are actually running on that host. We determine a CPU base rate as well as a memory base rate, and then see how much that VM is actually consuming in terms of average, and then assign that cost back to the VM, right? So the costing engine within vRops runs once per day. You can configure that in global settings and or do an ad hoc calculation if you'd like. But the third layer of this dashboard for me is the most important, right? Because whenever you're looking at costs, you want to grab the most expensive first. So this allows us to see, hey, these are one of which is me. These are, my top 10, my top 15 in terms of most expensive VMs. And then these are my most expensive clusters. And as you might expect, the ones with more VMs are up at the top. So there's a lot that we can do with the costing engine within vRealize operations from both the provider layer and the consumer layer. So Michael, anything you want to add there from a costing perspective?
Not from a costing, but we do have, I just want to mention that Sruthi is using the costing dashboard, and he thanks us for that. So I just want to just call that out. I think it's an important component there. And then we do have a question. Mukesh is asking, can we charge back on BG for CPU based on day interval? I'm thinking what is referenced by BG?
Yeah, I'm guessing business group.
I'm thinking that takes us into VRA. So can we charge back on, and maybe that is business group. Can we charge back on BG? So Mukesh, if you could define for us BG, that would help.
Yeah, my guess is, he wants to know, CPU-based usage for certain days. And we can give, we can see how much CPU has been used, say, average for a day or over a certain number of hours, and then provide some sort of chargeback or showback methodology there. So if you are talking about business groups, what we do is likely create some custom groups defined to those business groups, and then show back the CPU consumed by all of the workloads in those custom groups. So that's what I think the question is. If not, Mukesh, happy to follow up offline. Yep, so Shruti just asked another one. So we didn't ask for license or configuring HP OneView alerts. So HP OneView is one of the vRTBS management packs, and they are sold separately. So yes, you would need additional licenses for those. There are 55 different management packs in vRTBS, and they're licensed all sorts of different ways. Your TAM can help you, your CMBU rep can help you, but to consume any of the HP OneView alerts, with vRTBS, you would need additional licensing, Shruti. Yep. Okay, so we only have, I have about 11:15 here. We did have a couple other slides we wanted to cover. Michael, do you want to cover those, or should I just keep going within vRealize operations here?
I think we just keep going. I think the demo is generating a lot of questions, so I think we just keep going with this format.
Okay, sounds good. So, we talked a little bit about SaaS, we talked about IaaS, we talked about DBaaS, et cetera, et cetera. So, as most of the folks will know on the call, vRealize Operations is offered as a cloud service at this point, as is every other product in the vRealize suite. So there's vRealize Cloud, VRA Cloud, and as well as vRops Cloud. The feature function add here comes a little quicker, right? So maybe every month, every 2 months, we have new functions, new features. There are 4 APM integrations with vRops Cloud, as well as the ability to do near real-time monitoring, meaning the data that we're collecting in vRops Cloud has the ability to go down to 20-second collection intervals. So, we can hit your vCenter API every 20 seconds and collect data. On-prem, we can only turn that down to roughly a minute at this point. So if you recall, there are 5-minute default intervals. We keep data up to 6 months, but we can turn it down to 20 seconds in the cloud. So I encourage those of you that use vRops to check out the offering in the cloud. Your TAM and or CMBU rep should be able to get you trial access to that. Now, cloud, DBaaS. So everything kind of as a service, right? And we can use and leverage the vRops platform to provide visibility to non-DBAs, i.e. application developers, consumers, users of the application. We can give them visibility into database without being a DBA, right? Without knowing SQL Studio or Foglight or any other database monitoring tool. We can give them visibility into their database.
Brock, did we lose you?
Yep,
you're back.
My connection just went
you're
away.
Back.
So
you're back. No problem.
we can give folks visibility into their database with vRops and VRTVS. So be it SQL, Oracle, any of the database platforms, this is roughly 10 or 12 that we support. It provides folks visibility into instances, into queries to see which queries might be running slowly. Basically, the ability to say, hey, if my application is running poorly, why and where, right? Is it the workload that's running poorly? Is it the VM that's ill-behaved? Is it the IaaS, right? Do I need to talk to my provider, my virtual admin, to actually show them what might be going on kind of under the covers? So DB as a service, I think vRealize Operations can be used for, as well as any of the public cloud type data, right? So if you're running native public cloud, AWS, Azure, GCP, et cetera, or you're running vSphere in the public cloud, so VMC on AWS, ABS, GCPE, vRealize Operations and or Cloud Health, which can get you some costing and right sizing information, can be the platform, kind of the single source of truth to capture all of those objects and all of those metrics. So some internet issues here, as you're probably seeing, Michael.
Hey, no problem at all. What we can do is I can transition and we can work through the remaining slides and then hit the slide on our references. That might be a good place to transition.
Yep, sounds good. Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead, and I know, Brock, you're having a couple of connectivity issues, no problem. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and give me a second here. Okay, I'm going to share my screen, and desktop one. And Brian or team, if you can tell me that you do see purpose-driven architecture.
Yes,
yep, we do.
Full screen? And it's full screen, correct?
Correct.
Great, perfect. All right. So the remaining time we have, let's go ahead and just transition back to the idea of operationalize your world. And the conversation we hear is the purpose-driven architecture. And the key question is what services are you providing to your customers? And so when you think about the conversations, of how you're going to be leveraging vRops and what it can do for you, this is a conversation that you can have with your TAM. and really think through programmatically, what services are they asking for? What services are you willing to provide? And then placing those service level agreements on those services. And those service level agreements can go into detail, but it gives you that framework for ensuring. And then as you define those SLAs then get applied within, maybe it's policies, maybe it's lower thresholds on alerts that tells you, instead of when our capacity resource hits 80%, maybe you want to be notified at maybe 50%. And those are some details that you can work out. And those are conversations you can have with your TAM or however you are consuming vRops with our services. And so what this represents here, and why I'm sharing this screen, is this is a screenshot actually from the ebook that talks about what you're selling as a service and some examples. And so these are just ones that we're just referencing here. I'll go to the next slide here. And the idea here is really understanding the difference between insight and alert. And this is the difference of that proactive approach. And what we see on the right-hand side is alerts versus insight. And we use this iceberg as a way of defining the two and to understand the approach, where we see that insights complement alerts. It doesn't replace it. They're just used differently. And so alerts is that formal event with a ticket recorded. And that operations, that help desk is getting notified. And it's going to need some sort of response. And how you manage alerts is a good indicator for how you are operationalizing vRops. Because if, again, going back to our first couple slides, if everybody's hair is on fire when you're troubleshooting, obviously there's always going to be situations like that, but we come back to how can we proactively address those. And so what we're saying here is leveraging an insight using vRops, not as just for an alert generation and being inundated by noise. That's another aspect of Operationalize Your World, is you want to minimize noise that provides you the ability to provide a good service. And we know that out of the box, vRops can provide a lot of alerts. So you want to tune those to give you the insight so as to have an appropriate response and managing the environment. And that's what they're referring to from an insight perspective, being proactive, and the management of knowing the big picture, knowing how your SDDC is behaving and how you want the SDDC to behave to respond back to customers. Go to the next slide. And so as a wrap up here, what we have is references. And we see the first reference is the 3rd edition. So these links, I checked these last night, both me and Brock did, and they are on point. Now, you can download the Word document if you want to at that first link. The second link is a e-version that is rendered through HTML that you can consume as well. And great kudos to the resource that provided that. So again, also the next 2 is the Operation Sample Exchange. Key things, think about it from this perspective. Why create dashboards from scratch if you can go out and pull from the Exchange already pre-created dashboards that are being generated from the community? So definitely check those out. If you're ever considering new dashboards, see what's publicly available already. And then the last things we'll say is, Brock Peterson's blog. Definitely check out Brock's site. Wealth of information, great resources there. My blog is referenced here, but it's not necessarily focused on vRops yet. It's really just focused on some VRA content. But these are references that you can get. There is a question James asks, will you send the link to the recorded video? Yes, the TAM will make that available. And the last thing I want to do wrap up with is eventually this is going to find its way to the YouTube channel. And I just want to compliment the TAM organization for creating that YouTube channel. It's some of the best content out there that's longer than 30 minutes, longer than 5 minutes, great content. So go out there to check out lots of different solutions and references for managing your environment. And so with that, we'll hand it back over to Brian. And we just want to thank you for taking time with us today. Back to you, Brian.
Michael, Brock, thanks so much. This is very useful content today, and so thank you for the presentation. As we mentioned at the beginning, this presentation was recorded, and your TAM will make that recording available to you. So please join us next month when we'll be looking at answering the question, why Tanzu? We look forward to seeing you for that on August 5th. Actually, yeah, August 5th. With that, thanks for joining today, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.